What would you do if you discovered someone was trying to poison you, right in the middle of a family dinner? As for me, I didn't just suspect it, I saw it with my own eyes. That woman poured something into my drink. That woman was my mother-in-law. Even worse? My wife sat right next to her and did nothing to stop it. So I switched glasses. I handed that glass to her husband, my father-in-law. Minutes later, he began trembling and collapsed onto the table. My name is Daniel Brooks, 34 years old, living in San Diego, California. I'm a mechanical engineer and currently live with my wife, Emily, whom I've been married to for 3 years. We met in college, and although we weren't the perfect couple, I used to believe we at least had mutual respect and loyalty. But ever since we got married, my relationship with my mother-in-law, Carol, has always been tense. I don't know the exact reason. Maybe she thought I wasn't good enough for her daughter, or maybe she just disliked me from day one. Either way, she never hid her disdain. The way she called me the repair guy instead of an engineer, or how she smirked every time I spoke at the dinner table, it all silently screamed, "You don't belong in this family." I kept quiet, for Emily's sake. But what happened that evening couldn't be ignored. That night, my wife's family hosted a dinner at her parents' house in the suburbs of Sacramento. I came with Emily, and from the moment I walked in, I felt something was off. Carol was overly friendly, and Emily unusually silent. The rest of the family laughed and chatted, but I felt like I was standing in the middle of a play someone else had scripted. Dinner started off pretty normal. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, buttered biscuits, the usual dishes Carol always made. But during dessert, she suddenly stood up, holding a chilled pitcher of orange juice, and poured a glass for each person. When she got to me, she forced a smile and said, "You must be thirsty. Let me get you a glass." Everyone was stunned. She had never offered to pour me anything before. I looked at the glass. The light above the table reflected off the ice. Nothing looked unusual, but something told me to be cautious. I didn't drink it right away. I left it in front of me, then turned to chat with Mr. Fred, my father-in-law, who was sitting next to me. During a moment of laughter at one of Uncle Tommy's jokes, I quickly swapped my glass with his. Part of me felt guilty, but I needed to be sure, or at least have something to prove my suspicions. I knew Mr. Fred usually drank water, not orange juice, so if he finished the glass, it would just be out of politeness. And then, less than 5 minutes later, he placed his hand on his forehead. He said he felt dizzy. "I'm a bit lightheaded. Is anyone else feeling hot?" he gasped. Immediately, all eyes turned toward him. Emily stood up in concern and helped him into the living room to rest. Carol should have been the most worried, but I noticed her hand trembling as she poured water for someone else. It wasn't because she was concerned for her husband. She was scared. I knew exactly what I'd seen earlier. She had taken out a small bottle, twisted the cap, and secretly poured a few drops into my glass. She tried to make it look like it was just some kind of sweet syrup, but her movements didn't fool me. I didn't say anything at the time. I stayed silent throughout the evening. But in my head, a plan was already forming. She thought I was a fool. But she just drank from the trap she set for me. Fred, my father-in-law, was helped into the living room. He lay down on the couch, breathing heavily, his forehead covered in sweat. Emily sat beside him, clearly worried, while Carol stood frozen, staring at him, not out of concern, but because of the panic rising in her chest. "What's wrong with him?" Emily asked, her voice shaking. "Probably just low blood pressure," Carol cut in, unusually fast. "He didn't eat much today, and he was out gardening in the sun." No one said anything else? The family seemed to accept that explanation. People slowly returned to the dining table, though everyone could sense the atmosphere had shifted. As for me, I stayed still, watching every move my mother-in-law made. And I knew for sure she was afraid. About 15 minutes later, Fred seemed to be doing better. He sat up, drank some water, and said he needed to rest. I offered to help him to the bedroom, and when we were alone, I quietly asked. Did the orange juice taste a little strange to you? He frowned. Now that you mention it, kind of bitter. Why? I didn't answer right away. I didn't want to scare him, or make him start questioning his wife right after recovering. But that only made me more determined to act fast. After dinner, I made up an excuse to go to the garage to get my jacket. But really, I went back to the dining room, where the original glass of orange juice, poured for me, still sat. I put it in a Ziploc bag, sealed it tight, and quietly called Troy, my best friend from high school, now a lab technician at a private testing facility in the San Diego area. I need your help with something, urgently. Don't ask why, just run a test on this and tell me if there's anything off in it. I whispered over the phone. Troy agreed, no questions asked. I knew I could trust him. And inside me, I was boiling yet cold. I couldn't believe this was really happening. My mother-in-law, the same woman society praises as a model lady, always smiling at church events, could be capable of something like this. But was she really? I remembered clearly the way she opened the little bottle, poured in a clear syrupy liquid into my juice, and stirred it with a spoon. I also remembered how she glanced around the table to make sure no one was watching, but she didn't realize I saw everything in the reflection of the glass cabinet behind her. While waiting for Troy's results, I tried to act normal. But I started to see the little signs I'd ignored before. Like how Emily had recently started defending her mother blindly. When I told her her mom had insulted me, she said I was being too sensitive. When I asked about large unexplained withdrawals from our joint bank account, she snapped that I was being controlling. I used to think marriage was just between two people. But I was wrong. When a third person, especially a mother-in-law, starts meddling and manipulating everything, it's no longer a relationship. It's a battlefield. 3 days later, Troy called. You might want to sit down, he said, his tone serious. There are traces of benzodiazepine in the orange juice sample. Sleeping meds? Exactly. A mild tranquilizer, but with enough dosage, it can knock someone out within 20 minutes. You got lucky. I stood frozen. Not out of fear, but because now I had real proof. The only question left was, what did she plan to do to me after I passed out? And why didn't my wife stop her? That night, I sat alone in the garage, holding the sealed sample glass in my hand. The worst-case scenarios kept running through my mind. Were they trying to frame me? Record something to ruin me? Or just make me lose control so they could kick me out of Emily's life, like I was some kind of lunatic? I knew I couldn't confront them head-on. I needed a plan. If they could play dirty, I could expose them one by one, through the law. I didn't sleep that night. Not from fear. But from the feeling of betrayal, of being disrespected, of being treated like a disposable pawn in a game I didn't even know was being played. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw myself collapsing at the dinner table, blacking out, waking up in some nightmare, with no proof, and no one on my side. And worst of all, I started to doubt Emily. The woman I once loved deeply. The one I thought I'd grow old with. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I made coffee, prepared breakfast like usual. Emily walked out of the bedroom, her hair messy, wearing a silk robe, her eyes slightly avoiding mine. Did you sleep okay? She asked softly. I nodded. It was all right. You? She paused for a beat, then shook her head. I'm still worried about Dad. Mom called this morning, said he's still not feeling well. I nodded, silently watching her expression. She didn't mention the drink. Didn't ask why I switched glasses, or why I left the dinner table early and stayed quiet the rest of the night. She knew. But she chose to stay silent. A few days later, I checked our joint bank account. Nearly $8,000 had been withdrawn a few weeks earlier, transferred to an unrecognized account. I asked Emily about it. She got angry right away. Are you trying to control me? That's money I sent to Mom to fix the roof. $8,000 to fix the roof? I frowned. You never mentioned anything. Do you expect me to report every little thing to you? It's our money, and I have a right to use it. I didn't reply. I just looked at her. For the first time, I truly saw Emily as a stranger. The puzzle pieces started coming together. How she'd changed recently. The late nights she claimed were work meetings. The way she clutched her phone and kept me from seeing the screen. And now the money? I decided to talk to Ben, a close friend and civil attorney who had helped me with the house paperwork. I didn't give him all the details, just posed a hypothetical question. Say a husband suspects that his wife and mother-in-law are plotting to set him up to take his assets in a divorce. Is there any way he can protect himself? I asked. Ben furrowed his brow, staying quiet for a while. Then he said, "You'll need solid evidence. Recordings, photos, financial records. And most importantly, you have to prove collusion. If the mother-in-law acts alone, the wife isn't responsible. But if there's proof she's in on it, that's a whole different story." I nodded, a sense of resolve rising within me. I needed proof. That night, I started documenting everything I knew. Times, words, odd behavior. I planted a small audio recorder in the kitchen, where Emily often made phone calls. I also installed a hidden camera in the garage, where I kept important documents and files. A few days later, I captured the first noteworthy recording. Emily was on the phone with her mom. Her voice was soft, but clear enough. "I don't know. He's starting to get suspicious." Carol's voice replied, cold and calm. "Then you need to move fast. If he gets a head start, you won't get anything. We've prepared for this long enough." I clenched my earbuds tightly. My throat tightened. I replayed it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hearing things. They really were planning something. I printed the transcript, time-stamped it. Backed up the file to 3 different places: my laptop, an external drive, and cloud storage. I couldn't risk losing this evidence. From that moment on, I knew I had to stay calm and play the part of the clueless husband a little longer. The more they thought their plan was working, the easier it would be for me to expose them later, legally, in court, and if needed, publicly. I looked over at Emily, asleep on the couch, clutching her phone like it was part of her. A month ago, I thought she was my safe haven. Now she and her mother were building a storm to wipe me out. But this time, I wasn't going to get swept away. I would be the one controlling the storm. From the moment I heard that call between Emily and her mother, everything inside me changed. I was no longer Daniel Brooks, the mild-mannered, passive engineer. I was a man being hunted, and I had decided not to run. I was stepping back into the game, but this time, I'd play by my own rules. The first thing I did was open a separate bank account, discreetly, with no ties to our joint one. I began slowly moving funds from my income into it, bit by bit, disguised as legitimate expenses, like charitable donations, debt repayments, and work-related supplies. Everything had receipts and justifications. No red flags that I was hiding money. But in truth, I was moving assets out of Emily's reach. Next, I hired a private investigator, a former cop with experience in civil cases involving marital fraud. I gave him the recording, laid out the full story, and emphasized one thing: I didn't want to hurt Emily, I just wanted the truth. He nodded and said, "You'll need time and patience. They think you're weak, and that's your greatest advantage." I started playing the act, leaving my phone in plain sight, letting Emily believe I had no suspicions. I kept cooking, checking in, driving her to work like nothing had changed. But inside, I was counting the days, waiting for them to make their next move. And then, the opportunity came. One Friday evening, Emily said she needed to return to Sacramento for 2 days to take care of her father, Fred, who was still recovering from his episode. I nodded, even offered to drive her to the airport. After she left, I contacted the investigator. 3 hours later, he sent me a video. Emily never went to her parents' house. She checked into a hotel outside the city, accompanied by a man. His name was Lucas, a divorce attorney. Former classmate of Emily's. And according to preliminary findings, he was the one who helped Emily and her mother orchestrate the withdrawals, asset transfers, and prepare a preemptive strike divorce file. I let out a cold laugh. They didn't just want me out of Emily's life. They wanted to ruin me, my reputation, and my finances. But I wasn't weak anymore. The next day, I went to my in-laws' house. Pretended to check in on Mr. Fred. Carol opened the door, a trace of hesitation in her eyes. I brought some pastries and supplements for him. I smiled. She looked at me cautiously. My daughter didn't come with you? She said she'd stop by later. I lied, walking straight in. I entered the living room where Mr. Fred was lying down reading the paper. He looked better, but his eyes still seemed tired. I handed him the pastries, pulled a chair closer, and lowered my voice. Do you know what's really going on? He looked at me, silent. After a while, he said, I'm not crazy. I know something's off. My wife, she's been strange these past few months. Whispering on the phone with Emily. Dodging my questions. I sighed, then pulled out a copy of the recording and placed it on the table. This is what Emily and her mother said, about getting rid of me before I could react. You're the only person in this family I trust. And you drank what was meant for me. Mr. Fred's hands trembled as he picked up the transcript, reading a few lines before staring at me, stunned. Are you sure? I'm not guessing. I have proof. Audio recording and the test results from that orange juice. It contained benzodiazepines. He hung his head. After a long pause, he whispered, You're not the first person they've done this to. I was shocked. What do you mean? Emily was engaged to someone else, 6 years ago. He disappeared after an argument with Carol. No one ever heard from him again. You're the only one who's dared stand up to her, Daniel. If you don't do something, there'll be another victim. I clenched my fists. Now I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. That night, I returned to San Diego. I called Ben, my lawyer. I want to file for divorce first, I said firmly. And I want to bring everything into the light. Ben was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, Good. We'll move first. I looked out the window, streetlights casting long shadows across the sidewalk. It was all beginning. And this time, I wasn't hiding. I would expose everything. The next morning, as Emily stepped back into the house, I was already waiting in the kitchen. She walked in, carrying a brand new designer bag, her eyes detached, like everything was still under her control. But this time, I didn't ask how the trip went. I didn't pretend anymore. Did you sleep well at the Fairmont Hotel? Emily froze. The bag dropped to the floor with a thud. What did you say? Her voice was panicked. I stepped forward and placed a small USB on the table. You can listen to it, your call with your mother. And the video of you and Lucas in room 302. Emily's face turned pale. She stepped back. You were spying on me? I nodded. Just like you and your mother have been quietly trapping me for months. I didn't wait for her to deny it. I handed her a folder, divorce papers filed by me, already signed, along with a full asset disclosure, copies of the recordings, and a list of witnesses. I filed this morning, I said. And I've sent all the evidence to my lawyer, the court, and a few independent journalists. Emily opened the folder, her hands trembling. You can't do this. You did it first. You just didn't expect me to strike back. Less than 72 hours later, everything exploded. A local news outlet ran the headline. Husband alleges mother-in-law drugged him at family dinner, family conspiracy to seize assets? The article included the audio recording of Emily and her mother's conversation, along with photos from the hotel security camera. The court immediately scheduled an emergency hearing to protect shared assets and froze all financial transactions involving both parties. Emily vanished from social media. Her mother was hunted online by the public and was dismissed from the school board where she had volunteered. As for Lucas, the attorney, he faced the threat of disbarment for unethical conduct, having had an affair with a client during divorce proceedings. Ben, my attorney, pressed forward methodically. He requested a full financial audit of Emily, an investigation into the origin of illicit transfers, and a public hearing to review third-party involvement in the marital asset manipulation scheme. I wasn't happy to do this. I just wanted peace. But I also couldn't let myself be buried in silence. A week later, I got a call from my father-in-law, Mr. Fred. Daniel. I'm sorry. I didn't know things had gone this far. I stayed silent too long. His voice was choked. I submitted a sworn statement to the court confirming everything you said. If you need me, I'm willing to testify. I was nearly speechless. Thank you for choosing what's right. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Emily no longer carried the same pride. She sat next to a new attorney, not Lucas, her face pale. Ben spoke first, brief and firm. He submitted all evidence, the recordings, hotel invoices, bank transfers, and Mr. Fred's statement. Emily's attorney tried to distance her from the plot, placing all blame on Carol, but the court wasn't easily fooled. After reviewing the materials, the judge nodded. These documents provide sufficient grounds to open a criminal investigation and suspend the defendant's access to joint assets. Emily broke down in tears. She turned to me. Do you really want to destroy me like this? I said nothing. I simply stood and left the courtroom, not as a victor, but as someone who still held on to his dignity. A month later, the preliminary ruling was issued. Assets were split 70/30 in my favor. Emily was ordered to return 80% of the money she had transferred illegally during the divorce preparations. Her mother faced criminal charges for conspiracy to drug and violate privacy. Lucas was temporarily suspended from practicing law. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post anything online. I simply began tidying up the house, this time my house. No more shadowy control, no more calculating glares from my mother-in-law, no more swapped drinks or whispered schemes. Just me, and a peace I thought I'd never reclaim. Every morning since it all ended, I sit on the balcony, coffee in hand, watching the sun peek through the trees to the east. I used to share this moment with Emily, or at least I thought I did. But now, there's no one beside me. No one pretending to love me. And strangely, I feel lighter than ever. I no longer have to fight for a marriage I was the only one believing in. No more walking on eggshells during dinner. No more enduring my mother-in-law's sneers or forcing a smile at her backhanded remarks. I am free. But freedom doesn't mean it's easy. I had to start over, not just financially, but emotionally. Work was still going well. After the case gained media attention, some tech companies invited me to speak at seminars on personal legal protection and marital assets, something I never thought I'd be involved in. I declined a few offers but eventually accepted one talk at the local university I once attended. It was held on a Friday afternoon. The auditorium was packed with students and a few professors. I didn't speak like a lecturer, I just told my story. From the night of the drugged orange juice to the moment I realized I'd been betrayed, not by one person, but by a web of deceitful relationships. When I finished, the room was silent. Then a student raised his hand and asked, "Do you regret anything?" I paused for a moment and replied, "Yes. I regret not trusting my instincts sooner. And I regret not standing up for myself earlier. But I also know that without going through all of that, I would never have learned how to protect myself." In June, I moved to a small house near the coast, about a 45-minute drive from San Diego. It wasn't fancy, but it was peaceful enough to hear the waves crashing at night. I named it, The Reset, a new beginning. I converted the garage into a personal workshop, where I could draft engineering plans and work on woodworking projects as a hobby. I put my old blueprints back up on the wall, as a reminder that I still held value, in both work and life. Then one morning, while walking my dog around the neighborhood, I met a woman named Julia. She was walking with her daughter, about 7 years old. We talked for a bit, about the weather, about school, and eventually, Julia asked me, "Have you lived here long?" I smiled. Just a few weeks. But it feels like a lifetime. For the first time, I get to just be myself. Julia smiled back. Her eyes didn't judge. They weren't overly curious. They just listened, and that made me feel strangely at ease. We started seeing each other more often, sometimes at the seaside cafe, sometimes at the grocery store. No one rushed, no one demanded anything. We let things unfold naturally, without pressure, without expectations. I used to think I'd never believe in love again. But it turns out, when scars are healed with patience and sincerity, people can begin a new chapter, even if there's still some fear lingering inside. One afternoon, while cleaning out some old books, I found a photo, me and Emily on our wedding day. I was about to throw it away, but instead, I placed it in a wooden box, sealed it, and wrote on the lid. Not a bad past, just a lesson. I no longer hate Emily. I just feel sad, for her mother, for everything they lost by choosing lies over love. I chose to forgive. Not to give them peace, but to give myself peace. A few months later, after everything had settled, I received a letter from Mr. Fred, Emily's father. Daniel, thank you for saving me from years of blindness. I've filed for divorce from Carol. There's no reason for me to keep living under control. I'm planning to move to Oregon, near my eldest son, someone my wife forbid me from contacting for years. I hope one day we can meet again, this time, as two free men, no longer tied to the wrong women. I smiled. Not because I had won, but because I had found myself again. That fall came late. The ocean breeze still carried the warmth of summer, but inside me, there was a clear shift. Something, call it peace, or maybe growth, was slowly replacing the bitterness, anger, and pain I once clung to like armor. I no longer let the past guide me. I no longer reread every message, or question every person who came close. I began to trust again, not blindly, but with eyes that had seen the truth. Julia still comes by every Saturday evening, with her daughter, Emma. We usually sit on the porch, eat cookies, sip iced tea, and talk about everything under the sun. No declarations of love, no over-the-top gestures. But I know, something is blooming between us, slowly and gently. One time, Julia told me about her divorce. It wasn't loud, no betrayal, just a quiet parting when two people stopped heading in the same direction. She said, "There was a time I thought I'd never trust anyone again. But then I realized, trust isn't something you give once and lose forever. It's something you can rebuild, as long as the person next to you is willing to build it with you." I stayed silent for a moment, then nodded. "I think I've found someone like that." She looked at me, smiled, and said nothing more. But that smile, I'll remember it forever. The day I officially completed all post-divorce procedures, I held a small gathering, not to celebrate, but to thank those who stayed by my side when everything seemed to fall apart. Ben, my friend and the best lawyer I've ever known, Mr. Fred, my former father-in-law who has now become a close friend, and Julia, the woman who showed me that love doesn't have to be loud. We raised our glasses. No one mentioned Emily or Carol. No one brought up the fateful glass of orange juice. We only talked about what lay ahead, my new project with a startup in Texas, the camping trip Julia and Emma invited me on, and the idea to launch a free soft skills class for engineering students, suggested by Ben. At the end of the evening, Mr. Fred patted my shoulder and said, "You know what, Daniel? You didn't just survive, you came out of it a better man." I simply smiled, feeling light. One early morning in November, I went out to the beach. The sun was just rising, painting the horizon gold. Julia called, her voice excited. "Do you remember the name the reset you gave to your house?" "Of course." "Well, I think it's time the reset gets a new chapter." "What do you mean?" "Emma and we want to see if the three of us can write something together, something truly gentle." I stood still before the waves. It felt like my heart had quietly opened, no more fear, no more avoidance. "I want that too, Julia." "So, shall we try?" "Yes." Slowly, but sincerely. A year after that fateful day, I no longer saw divorce as a failure. It was the door to freedom. The storm that forced me to learn how to steer on my own. A lesson in clarity, in the value of trust, and most of all, a chance for rebirth. I was no longer the man who sat still while his wife and mother-in-law controlled his life. I was the man who stood up, looked pain in the eye, and turned it into strength. Near the end of the year, when Emma gave me a small drawing of 3 people holding hands in front of the ocean, I asked her, "Who's in this picture?" Emma answered matter-of-factly, "My new family, of course." I looked at Julia. She was sitting in the yard, reading a book, and I smiled. No titles needed. No wedding rings. Just truth, and unconditional love. I was once betrayed by the person I thought was the love of my life. I almost lost everything because of a swapped glass of juice. But because of it, I found myself, and a future full of hope. From a man once betrayed by his wife's family and nearly left with nothing, Daniel rose from the shock, not only reclaiming justice, but also rediscovering himself and a new life full of meaning. He didn't let the past define his future, but used the pain as a springboard to grow and open his heart again. His story reminds us, no matter how deeply we've been hurt, if we're brave enough to let go and move forward, happiness can still come, peacefully. What do you think about this story? Can betrayal lead to something better if we know how to face it? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt true stories about life and family.